So what I'm going to present is the Silicon Valley Bank. Actually, there's a little quote which I just read yesterday from the Fed report, the Barr report, I think it's called. So the SVB failure demonstrated that there are weaknesses in regulation and supervision that must be addressed. And I think what we are going to show is not just a little tape. It's really a new way of doing it. And I think that's what they need. Just to make sure what the target of the exercise is. So we will reconstruct Silicon Valley Bank as a different type, but I don't claim to have an exact picture. But yesterday, actually, I only was reading the Barr report yesterday. I saw that some of the calculations are quite close. Actually, they did some calculations and we are not that far away, which is quite interesting. So we are in the ballpark. So in this sense, the numbers can be taken serious. But the target really is to show and to demonstrate that a truly forward-looking system for regulators, and of course not only regulators, is possible, and that it's very useful for regulatory use case, and that people really see, in this case, years before. So it's not just a few days, and that we can already apply the technique now, highly approximative, from call reports. Let me show you what we did on these 4 times. It's Q4 21, Q2 22, and Q4 22. So these are the 3 points in time when we looked at the bank to see when it could have been saved yet. Actually, we found we should have gone even one more back, but it's so much work, so we had to stop. Call reports, it has been already said, they are a little bit problematic. Actually, they are really account-based, which means it's mainly backward-looking. Accounts tell you what I did till today. There's little forward-looking information there, yes, but highly aggregated. And the information is scattered. So you look here, you look there, and you try really to make the best picture possible. But still, we were able, it's possible at least to a certain time. Actually, we reconstructed the bank in my teaching. I'm teaching at the ETH and University of Zurich master's course, which is called Risk and Finance Lab. And so the students are new. Okay, they have a lot of theory, but no practice. So we had to introduce them to the software, to a lot of theory as well. So it's a double course, so 13 weeks. 40% is lecture, more theoretical, and 60% lab, where they work. And then they build models of banks. And now, in this case, one of the group built Silicon Valley, based on call reports, also press articles and stuff like that. And we use the software analytics. That's our software. That's fully built on ACTUS. So in the center of analytics is ACTUS. To be sure what is ACTUS and what is, I would call ACTUS Plus, which is beyond in analytics. For example, there you define analysis structure. In this case, it was a balance sheet structure. We reconstructed a balance sheet structure of Silicon Valley Bank. And you import data, and while you import, there's a lot of checking. It's the data must be very consistent, so all that is done. We import the risk factors, similar to what Francis has been showing, especially yield curves in this case, could be other. Also counterparty information and behavioral assumptions. Then we define risk scenarios, stress tests, and some strategies, going concern over time. It has additional functionality. For example, we do accounting. So once you have the cash flows, you can do any accounting, because the only reality is cash flow, and everything derives from cash flow. So any book value, be IFRS or local GAAP, amortized cost, fair value, etc., you can do that. We integrate all risk categories so that you can do credit risk as well, and other operational risk types of things. So then you can do what we call analysis mode. So there is historic analysis, end of day, stress testing, forecasting. So what I did here with Silicon Valley was historic, 3 different, but then some dynamic going into the future. So which then integrates risk, finance, and what I would call new regulation, forward-looking regulation. So how do we turn call reports into ACTUS contracts? So on the left side, you have the reality of the bank. The bank exists of contracts, as we have heard here today many times. They are in digital form actually already, but unstandardized, and that's the problem. It's quite chaotic. And so that it becomes even inside the bank analysis a challenge. So that data is turned into call reports. As said, backward-looking scattered. So it's basically a selection, grouping, aggregation, which you find then over the many pages of the call report. Then we looked at that and we turn it into ACTUS contracts. So we interpret the call report. And basically what we want to have the same contracts they had in reality, of course, in an aggregated form. So an approximation. And then we add assumptions. And then we have a standardized algorithmic representation. Based on that, we add market data, counterparty data, behavior, expectations and things like that, and we analyze. The main challenges is where that, first of all, that what you need is the timing there. When do cash flows happen, under which conditions? That's basically what you need, which can only be partially reconstructed. Mainly the timing for loans we didn't find. We found it for government bonds on a highly aggregated. Interest rates are not available of these instruments. We get gross income numbers, so you can somehow imagine interest rates, at least check whether the rates we assumed are somehow correct. And there's no credit rating available. So all these things are quite important to get the correct value, especially in a low rate environment. You know, whether the rate of the bonds, the 30-year bond is 1 or 1.5% makes a big difference in value, for example. So we filled the gaps with the best possible assumptions. So first we reproduced the balance sheet structure, then produced the ACTUS contracts and analyzed at the 4 points. So we did at every point the end of day analysis. So how did the balance sheet look then, and different analysis. We did stress tests at each point in time. And then we found, I can already preclude that the case was already hopeless in 2022. So we went back to 2021. And there we did a little bit of deeper analysis. What you see here, it's a bit small, but on the left side is the balance sheet. If you would see it exactly, and you go to the call report, it looks the same. So it's exactly the same balance sheet as you have it in the call report. And now at this point below, we are focusing on mortgages, for example. They have mortgages. And within mortgages, we see now the contracts. So each line is a contract, in this case, an annuity contract. So as typical mortgages are, I'm focusing on the second part below. And if I click on it, so then actually that did call then the ACTUS code. And then we get all the events. They have been shown already by Francis, but now it's inside this system. So date, especially event time, event value, currency, etc. And below we get it in a picture. Here, you know, you see the principal payments, the interest payments, there's rate reset, so the payments have to be recalculated. All that information you find in here. So that's the base information, and so we can consider ACTUS being like an operating system of finance. And you build a lot of things around it. Like if you had only DOS, it wouldn't be really helpful. You need Excel, you need PowerPoint, you need Word and stuff like that. And so these are the things which we are building around this kind of information. So here we look at the balance sheet that's at Q4 22. So that was not so long before the fall, but as Alan said, at that time, regulators still had the impression that the balance sheet was sound. So what do we get here? Most interesting is this here. Here I look at the total, at the equity level, actually, at the total level of the bank. We see on the right side IFRS value. Let's say I'll start on the left. On notional term, the bank had a value of 11 billion or 12 billion, say. On IFRS term, based on the information we had, it had about 8 billion. But on fair value term, at that time, it has minus 20 billion. Doesn't look very sound for somebody. So there's a gap of 27 billion. And I looked at the information yesterday at what the Fed calculated with much better information. So they came about of 25, so about minus 18, something like that, or minus 15. So it's not very far away. So from where does it come? It comes mainly from the held-to-maturity securities, that's clear. So instead of 91 billion, which was the book value, which they showed in the books, so the value we calculated is 61 billion, so a difference of 30 billion, which we had. So, and interesting for ACTUS is really, once you have the cash flow, you can do any accounting. You say want a fair value, amortized cost, everything. Everything derives from this event list, you know, the list which I showed where you have each event, and so everything can be derived. Here we did a little LCR approximation. Actually, we got to a very high, there are some other numbers around. I saw more near 100%. We came to 300%. Maybe some people excluded the held to maturity, but they are also liquid, high quality. So the LCR, in a sense, was really not the problem because the money was invested in high quality liquid instruments. So that was not the problem. The problem was really the unaccounted loss. If you start to realize it, you will realize the loss. And then, of course, your equity will be wiped out in no time. So that there was no hope there anymore. And then, of course, add the fraction of uninsured deposits, 95%, and that did it. So if you look at liquidity, it really is a very scary picture, because almost all the liabilities were in deposits. I mean, 140 billion, there were 60 somewhere else. So here, and here in this picture, we consider them all short-term. Actually, each interval is 3 months. So they can be gone in 3 months, even if they are gone in 6 months or 1 year. Doesn't really change the picture. The picture was, of course, all on the right side, these long-term assets which they had. And I mean, that was really very difficult liquidity gap situation. So then we looked at the sensitivity, you know, so we had already a net minus value of 20 or 21 billion US dollar, and the duration was minus, say, 70. Which means if the interest rate goes up another percent, another 1% up interest rate, so we will have 70% more loss from minus 20 to minus 34. It's highly sensitive, highly sensitive. Little movements in interest rates wipe out billions in no time. So we did some specific stress tests, not because, as Alan said, duration has its limits, its parallel shift and all that, although it's not such a bad number. But we did some other stress tests, so short-term consensus, which was 50 basis point up for short-term and 40 basis point for the long-term. You see that on the right side, that thing. So that is a shifting of the yield curve with a tilt in it. Then we did yet 100 basis point parallel shift up, which is approximately duration, but including convexity. Then 200 basis point up. And then for the check at minus 100 basis points. Very unlikely in that time. You know, we were in a time where everybody really expected the rates to go up. But still, you can do such things. In addition, we did yet the credit rating stress, because not only would interest rates go up, but credit would deteriorate. So at the same time, so it has a double effect, really. And especially in the case of Silicon Valley Bank, because they shifted the balance sheet into more credit. So here we get the results of the stress test end of 2022. On the left side, this color graph, this is fair value. In the middle, it's nominal value. That's naturally not sensitive. And then on the right side, we see the IFRS value. So we see the blue bar is there was the existing situation, minus 20, which we had about then. And orange is this 50 basis point, 40 basis point up with a slight tilt in it. And so that raises it already to 25, minus 25. And then the green is the 100 basis point. So that's about duration. And it gives roughly this the correct number there, a little bit more than 30 billion minus then. And the red one is the 200 basis point. Now, the next one is then if the rates would have gone up, that would have fixed the problem almost, but not even that. It should have gone more than 1% up, which was very unlikely. Then the brown bar, that is the no shift in rates, but a shift in rating. So that downgrade, so a downgrade of the counterparties, which had a heavy effect. Then downgrade plus rating shocks came there, and we see then we are down to minus 80 million or so, something like incredible. But what is most amazing is that on the right side, IFRS value is very insensitive to that. Because most of that was held to maturity. So in IFRS term, any scenario would have been good. We look now, since we decided that was an unsafeable state, so we have to go back in time. So we have now here three times. On the right, we have Q422. You don't see it, it's in the blue. I didn't know how to do that. In the middle, it's Q222, and left is Q421. The left bar is nominal value, and we see nominal value didn't change much because the balance sheet stayed almost stable over the time on nominal terms over the whole year. There was not much movement. The right bar is the IFRS, which moved only little, but striking is then the fair value. End of 21, we still had a slightly positive fair value, according to our conditions, plus minus could be. But then in mid-22, it was really the worst situation. We had the minus 25 billion and the minus 20 billion in Q4. Actually, it improved a little bit. We wondered, but probably that was the reshuffling of the portfolio. And I saw in the Fed data also the numbers are a bit less severe there, but 5 billion, maybe less, but the same effect. So it seems to be something real there. So we came to the conclusion, so end of 22, nothing to be done. Also mid-22, we shouldn't even check. Then we looked at end of 21, whether something could have been done. That was just pre-interest rate hike. So we defined a strategy per end of 21. Because the fair value still was positive. Interest rates were widely expected to go up. And a future bank run in such a situation only be avoided by taking appropriate actions to preserve the value of the bank. There were hedges being in place. I mean, we heard it was also in the report. They had hedges, which they solved. We also checked that we did a dynamic simulation. The income on the hedge was negative. It had a positive value effect, but a negative income effect. So probably they wanted to show nice income and get some profit at the same time. So they thought that's a good idea. Of course, it was probably the worst idea you could have. So then, based on that, we implemented hedges. So we said, what would it have been if we would have hedged? And we implemented hedges. We tested hedges at end of 21. 3 swaps, actually, a 5-year, 15 years, and a 25 years swap to cover the entire range here and to see how the condition of the bank would be affected. We experimented with different volumes. How much swaps would they need to do in this kind? And we came that it is 100 billion plus they would have needed. Whether this is a realistic volume, I don't know. I don't know how deep the market is. So it probably just at that time to add would have been maybe difficult. But anyway, so we added here 110 billion US dollar interest rate swaps 3, as I said before. and we assumed they were bought somewhere in 2021. So they had already a little value, positive value, end of 2021. So here is the stress test. So up in the upper picture, we see the bank without swap. The blue, again, is the current situation. It was slightly positive, 1 or 2 billion on fair value terms. Then the consensus the increase, the orange, then 100 basis point and 200 basis point, the red one, and then the plus 100 basis point, of course, would have lifted it already high up, but that was totally unlikely at that time. Plus the other ones are including some credit spread here. In the middle, we see the effect of the swap. And of course, the swap would have given huge values like 10, 20 billion in this area. And the total effect would have been below. Still, if the rate would go up a full percent, it was still slightly negative, but only slightly. Especially in IFRS, they could have shown nice values, etc. on the right side. Maybe that would have helped at that time, if. So we looked at the income value effect. So on available for sale basis, so there was a negative contribution of swaps on income, but positive on value, as I said before. We looked at what would the swap have done if we would have had it then and then go into 22 mid and 22 end. So in this case, we see the fair value was slightly more positive in 21 already. In 22, it would have taken a little dip. In mid and end, it would have been positive here. So we come to a conclusion, and we must see. So we just took the data of the bank at that time, we took the market conditions of that time, and if the regulator would have had that kind of information, they would have seen the negative values, all that. They would have seen that years before. They would never have said, you know, this bank is sound, even not end of 21. So, but we checked with the swaps. It takes huge volumes. Maybe end of 21 was too late as well, because maybe the swap volume could not have been taken up in the market. So if that would not be possible, we should even go further back. But I'm sure even if we would, and of course, our students, there was a limited source. We couldn't go another time. It's a lot of work. So but we could have gone to mid 21 and probably then seen that. I guess mid 21 was where you would have seen the first sign, in my opinion. That is where it would have been then. So what did we demonstrate? That the forward-looking regulatory system is both possible and of great potential value. And regulators could have had the same analytic power and insight as a risk management. If I go, yesterday I read the Bar report, there was a lot of discussion. Yeah, before they were a small bank, then they became a big bank, and there was a new team, and they didn't know, and it takes 6 months to learn it. But if you have this data, I think even from one team to another, the base information would go pretty quickly and wouldn't have all these problems, because we would have now a standardized representation of the bank. Actually, if a team knows once in one bank, it would even know in other banks if the ACTUS standard would be the thing. Yeah, so we showed that we can enable a forward-looking regulation. And some people might say, yeah, of course, that's much too expensive and so on, and it is not. To implement something like ACTUS is about the same cost as implementing an asset liability management system or an enterprise risk management system. Most banks have gone through such exercises, so it's really well possible. It's not cheap, but definitely not expensive. And then the argument that for small banks it's more difficult than for large banks, that's even less true, because normally small banks are pretty simple. They have a homogeneous business, so that's easy to map. It's a question. And here in the US especially, there are only a few providers of such systems, 5 I think about, where if you had now the data from one provider, you would know a lot of the data of another provider already. I wouldn't say it's zero, but there would be huge synergies actually. So it would cost very little. Very little, ridiculously little. I think a tenth of the cost of Silicon Valley Bank or something like that to implement something like that. What would change? So that's the old chain. So now we went from bank to call, difficulty, re-extracted the data and then did the analysis. In a new regime, it would look much easier. So basically we can get rid of the middleman, which is in this case the call report. So the main thing is the banks themselves would turn it into ACTUS contracts. That is the mapping exercise, which I said before, which is the cost, which is not, it's a cost, but not a killing cost at all. And then regulators have the same analytic capability as a manager of a risk manager of a well-organized bank. The regulators can do the stress test themselves. They can do it as often as they want. They can do it as at any time, and they can change the assumption. They even don't have to tell. Today, the banks can do some window dressing and all that. It takes a long time. It takes much too long. The exercise can be repeated whenever it's needed, whenever there is stress. Now I focused on regulation, but I really want to repeat that this is not a regulatory system in the proper sense. It is also, but it's really a system for the financial sector where everybody will profit. On regulation level, yes, easier regulation, real insight, reduced costs. I believe the cost of regulation could be reduced drastically with increasing insight. Of course, the regulators have to do a little bit more work. Actually, I think at the end, less. They do the stress themselves. It's more interesting, in my opinion, so they can define scenarios and all that. But there would be much faster insight. And especially, there's no special burden on small banks. And if you want to do real systemic risk analysis on the entire sector, that's the only way to go. I think the biggest profiteers would be the banks themselves. The spaghetti picture from Alan, that would go. Instead, because we have now not many systems on the upper level, we have still many on the transaction processing, but the upper level can be reduced basically to one system where you do all analytics on the same basis. So that would reduce costs drastically. And I think small banks would benefit over proportionally because they would their knowledge would increase. Their financial literacy would increase drastically, which is only a positive. And finally, it's the clients, the investors who would benefit as well. And about that, I think the next event, the next one is about financial literacy. So everybody would benefit. And yeah, of course, due to the limited time, I could not really show you the details of the model. If you're interested in details, you can send me an email. Then if maybe 3-4 parties are interested, I can make a little webinar or something like that, whatever is interesting for you. Thank you very much.